So according to the latest data from the U.S. Census Bureau, small businesses are actually responsible for more than 90% of new jobs in this country. They generate more than half of the GDP and account for half of the private sector workforce. It's kind of small business mindset that then candidate Obama actually gave a lot of credence to. Let's take a look at back what he had to say in 2008.
We already know that the credit crisis that's emerged from our largest financial institutions is becoming a credit crunch for small business owners, homeowners, and students seeking loans in big cities and small towns across the country.
Oh, he sounds on top of his game, but regardless of his vocal commitments, President Obama has just put small businesses on the back burner. He recently announced plans to dismantle the Small Business Administration, or SBA, by combining it with the Department of Commerce. Ironic that the government would merge the SBA with an agency that represents the nation's largest corporate giants. Well, it's not just irony. You see, reports and investigations have been surfacing in the last couple of years that have exposed the inside workings of a fraudulent system. What a shock. To talk now about what's really going on here, I'm joined by someone who's been researching this issue for many years, Lloyd Chapman. He's the president of the American Small Business League. Lloyd, thank you so much for coming on. Nice to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So President Obama just justified that this merger is going to bring down the deficit. I mean, is this really the case here?
Absolutely not. It's going to increase the deficit and cost America millions of jobs. He's claiming he's going to save $300 million a year by combining the SBA and the Commerce Department. In the federal budget, that's peanuts. At the same time, he's increasing foreign aid by $9 billion. That's enough money to run the SBA for a decade. So Ronald Reagan actually tried to close the SBA twice back in his administration. And the way he was going to close it was to combine it with the Commerce Department. So make no mistake, President Obama's intention to combine the SBA with the Commerce Department is the same thing that Ronald Reagan was going to try to do and close the agency. And then all the programs for the small businesses where most Americans work, and as you stated, over 90% of the net new jobs are created.
And why are we even targeting the SBA when it's really like, I mean, you just mentioned so much in foreign aid, and really it's a drop in the bucket compared to the DOD, DHS, all these absurd agencies that are just exponentially growing. Why target the SBA?
You know, federal law says 23% of all federal contracts should go to small businesses. The federal government really spends over $1 trillion a year. So that means small businesses should be getting around $230 billion a year. Well, the big defense contractors in the military-industrial complex want that money. It's real simple. It's about greed. And the only way for them to get their hands on that money is to close the SBA. And once that happens, the big corporations will get 100% of all government contracts, all government spending. But the problem is they're not creating any jobs. And to do that would be devastating, you know, to our economy and cost this country millions of jobs.
Well, let's get into the fraudulent aspect of this. Of course, that's very corrupt. But your organization notes that 13 federal and 2 private investigations found evidence of fraud and abuse in federal contracting. What exactly is the government doing, and how much are we talking about here? Well,
according to the federal investigations that have gone on in the last decade, they found that large corporations are committing felony federal contracting fraud by making what they call false certifications, improper certifications, and engaging in vendor deception, which is punishable by up to 10 years in prison. And the large corporations misrepresent their subsidiaries and divisions as small businesses, and they're hijacking billions of dollars a month in contracts that should be going to the middle class where most Americans work, where all the jobs are created. And the SBA's own Inspector General has said the SBA is actually helping people to commit fraud. The General Accounting Office did an investigation a few years ago and also felt that the SBA was helping people to commit fraud. And this has gone on for over a decade, and you haven't seen any legislation policy to stop it. President Obama said he would stop it in February of 2008, but it's just gotten worse under his administration. And now he's going to try to close the SBA, I think, to try to cover it all up, actually.
I mean, this is a huge story. I heard you on another interview talking about how you tried to get this information out on corporate media. What kind of censorship have you encountered trying to get this information out?
You know, it's you wouldn't believe me. It's just unbelievable. When you're trying to get stories out on major television networks about companies that are some of their major advertisers, it's just not going to happen. And I've had, I guess I've had maybe a half a dozen national news organizations do stories about this and then not run them. And I've had stories shot about me, and then they take me out of the story and run it. But it's you wouldn't believe it. It's like something out of a science fiction movie. When you're talking about the biggest corporations in the world and hundreds of billions of dollars in government contracts, there's just almost no limit to what they'll do to keep this story out of the press. It's astonishing.
Right. Yeah, you're dead on about that. I wanted to get right back to the deficit, the enormous power that these corporations wield. We've been hearing about the fiscal cliff, all this fear-mongering about how we're going to dive off the fiscal cliff. We need to cut all across the board. But of course, you know, like these giant Fortune 500 corporations, we're not really talking about the tax loopholes that they get. Can you give us a sense of the break that they're getting already, Lloyd?
It's shocking. In fact, to tell you the truth, I'm stunned that I haven't seen it on the news. I think in 2011, IBM paid 1% in federal tax. ExxonMobil paid 2%. Of the 10 most successful U.S. corporations, the average tax rate they paid was 9%. And if we're trying to raise revenue, that's where we need to look. We don't need to raise taxes on the American people and close the only agency in Washington to help the small businesses where all the jobs are created. We need to make sure these large corporations are paying their fair share of taxes, and you're not seeing anyone in Congress even mentioning that. And of course, if I were in Washington, I would take a look at closing you know, some of the 1,700 military bases we've got around the world. I don't think we need 1,700 military bases around the world these days. But they're not really, you know, addressing these huge loopholes for corporations.
Absolutely.
Which I think would, yeah.
Absolutely. And Lloyd, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we have about 30 seconds left. I just wanted to ask you this. You're also highly critical of the Bush administration when it comes to the SBA. I mean, is this really about Democrats, Republicans, or does this go far greater than that?
It's about corruption in government, and it's about a plutocracy and a government that's run based upon money and contributions from the biggest companies in the world. That's what it's about. And the large companies get what they want, and the public, you know, gets the short end of the stick every time. That's what it's about. Corruption, I think, in Washington.
Two-party dictatorship is what I like to call it. Thank you so much, Lloyd Chapman, President of the American Small Business League. Very important story. Appreciate you coming on.